Hello, beautiful people. Thank you for tuning in. If you are new to my channel, my name is Paula Sinisterra, and I am a licensed associate professional counselor, so basically a mental health therapist and a certified hypnotherapist. On this channel, you're going to find all things mental health, videos covering topics from anxiety, OCD, relationships, and inspirational and motivational videos. So in today's video, I want to unpack for you guys a little bit more what it means to have anxious and obsessive thoughts, or maybe just anxious or anxious obsessive. And I want to also talk to you guys about how we can manage this, how we can deal with this in a way that allows us to keep moving towards our full potential and we don't get stuck or totally debilitated by it, okay? So first of all, I want to point out that anxious thoughts are usually fear-based thoughts, oftentimes thoughts about the worst happening, just catastrophizing, things of that nature. Obsessive thoughts are thoughts that are recurrent, that they keep coming back to us, that we get stuck on, right? And I talked a little bit about that in my OCD video last week, which I will link down below if you're curious about that. I want to learn a little bit more about that. But obsessive thoughts are thoughts that just keep coming back, that we get stuck on. A lot of times these are anxious, and that has a lot to do with why we get stuck on them, because we tend to get stuck on things that are distressing to us. We get stuck on this in a way that's distressing when it directly targets or threatens something that we value. So if we are having an obsessive thought about something that we like a recurrent thought that keeps coming back, but it causes no distress, that's not what we're talking about here. That's not what I'm making this video for. This video is to address thoughts that keep coming back persistently, that are distressing to us and are anxious, fear of the worst happening, things that directly threaten our values and things of that nature. Oftentimes when we have these thoughts, the first thing we want to do is get rid of them. We have to understand though, and I think this really helps when we are moving through this, is understanding that our brains evolved with a negativity bias. That means that because for most of humanity's history, we were in situations that were, we were like out hunting, and we were in situations where our survival required paying attention to immediate threats in the environment. We very much evolved to have a negativity bias. Things and studies have shown that in anxious and obsessive brains, when a mistake is made, the parts of the brain that register that mistake fire exponentially more intensely than in people that don't struggle with anxiety or obsessive thinking. So we have to know what kind of brain we are dealing with. It's so important to come to recognize that, my brain tends to be anxious. My brain tends to overly focus on threats on the environment. My brain tends to be very preoccupied with the possibility of the worst thing happening. My brain tends to, when I'm more stressed, get stuck on certain thoughts, that they come back again and again and again, right? Until we begin to get educated on what it means to have an anxious or obsessive brain, we can judge ourselves really harshly for this, especially with all the, popular media and the very popular conversation about just push yourself and positive thinking and positive affirmations. That stuff is great. It's great to try to think positive whenever we can. It's great to be conscious of that. It's great to be conscious of being optimistic. But when we are working with biology that tends to get stuck and hyper-fixated on the possibility of dangerous threats in the environment, because a lot of us evolved very strongly towards that, we need to invite self-compassion into the process. And we cannot try to suppress or bandage up the negative obsessive thoughts that we are getting stuck on by trying to push positive affirmations on top of them, trying to relax them away, trying to neutralize them. The problem with that is that in a roundabout way, when we think that we're actually trying to solve the problem of the thought, What's happening is that we are making it a bigger deal than it already is, because now we are even more focused on it, because now we're focused on trying to get rid of it. We have about 60,000 thoughts a day. When we have a tendency towards anxiety or obsessive thinking, we have a tendency to be specifically triggered by some of these thoughts. When we get triggered by these thoughts, we're likely to start feeling discomfort, right? When we start feeling discomfort, our natural human inclination is to try to find a solution, because as I've said before, our brain is a problem-solving machine. When we become fixated with trying to think positively or trying to relax, to get rid of the distress that's happening from this anxious thought that's, suddenly taking over, this obsessive thought that keeps coming back again, and I just need to get rid of it, we are sending the message back to our brain that this actually really is a bad thought, this actually really is a dangerous thought, and now I really am in more danger, which is gonna cause the part of the brain that obsesses to get even more obsessive about it, and the part of the brain that is scared and fearful to get even more scared and fearful of it. So trying to solve it by basically putting a band-aid of positive thinking or putting a band-aid of, relaxation is not going to work. I want you guys to start facing into these thoughts rather than immediately trying to suppress them or get rid of them, which we know that whatever we resist actually persists. I want you to start practicing identifying when they are happening, right? In the sense of literally saying to yourself, my brain is obsessing right now. My brain is stuck in gear, or I'm experiencing anxiety right now. This is fear, right? And my fear fight or flight system does not know shades of gray. It just knows I'm in danger and it's trying to protect me. Either way, our brain is trying to protect us. That's what it was intended for. That was its primary mode, its primary function it has been to ensure our survival. So when we get stuck in gear and we start obsessing over something, or we get really fearful, our survival is subconsciously being threatened, and our brain is trying to do what it can to help us remain in control. So we start by identifying that that's what's happening. You literally say to yourself, my brain is obsessing, my brain is stuck in gear, right? Or this is fear, this is anxiety. I am safe right now. I am safe right now. Literally repeat that to yourself so you can start sending the message back to your nervous system that you're safe, right? Like, yeah, there might be some stressful stuff going on, but you're not about to die. Your survival is not threatened, right? So if it's anxious, tell yourself I'm safe. If it's obsessive, either way, recognize what is happening right now is that my brain is stuck in gear because it is preoccupied and trying to make sure that I survive. What this does is that we can start bringing self-compassion into the process. So rather than bringing shame in where it's like, what is wrong with me? Why do I keep focusing on these things? I want to be positive. I want to be that kind of person. I want to be optimistic. Why do I keep, obsessing over like this stuff being perfect at work to the point that it's getting in the way of my relationships? Or why do I keep obsessing about the way I look? Like, this is crazy. I don't understand where my brain is doing this. Understand that your brain wiring is predisposed to get stuck and focus on threatening things in the survival, and what's going to be threatening is going to be based on your values. So bring some compassion in for your little brain who is just trying to do the best it can with the information presented to ensure your survival. Once we are able to recognize that this is biological, our brain is doing this, we can drop the shame around it. We can just start saying, my brain is obsessing right now. And, anxiety is taking place. That's what's happening. My brain is, kind of dysfunctioning at the moment. That's okay. It happens. I'm not going to immediately try to suppress this thought, because by doing that, I'm actually just engaging further into the fear. Like, I'm buying into my brain being stuck. So like, I'm basically further engaging with the dysfunction in my brain. So I'm going to go deeper into it. I'm going to get more stuck in it. No, I'm not going to try to suppress it. I'm not going to try to like get rid of it or like obsessively or, frantically try to relax it away. I'm not going to do that, because the moment I start doing that, I make all of it more real, when in reality, like, it's not real. It's our brain just kind of misfiring at that moment. So what we want to do is identify, like, that's what's happening. My brain is just misfiring. That's okay, right? It's trying to do the best it can. I don't have to beat myself up. The more I beat myself up, the more stuck I'm going to get in that. I want you guys to invite so much self-compassion into this process, to recognize what's going on with your biology. I think knowledge and understanding is the first step towards being able to be self-compassionate. Because if we know what's going on, then we don't have to immediately think like, this is happening because I'm not good enough. This is happening because I'm a bad person. No, our brains are misfiring. And for most of human history, that kind of brain structure was very effective at helping us survive. Now, we are living in a society where our technology has developed at an exponentially faster rate than our biology. So let's have a little bit of compassion for ourselves when our brain miswires around threats and our values being threatened, okay? The way that we can handle it is by facing into it, as I was saying earlier. So once we have identified, like, this is what's happening, I'm currently obsessing, my brain is stuck in gear, this is just what's happening at a biological level, I can't really control that, but I'm not gonna make the problem worse. We identify it, and then what we do is we face into it. So with anxiety and obsessive thoughts that are like seeking control, like I'm gonna think about this over and over again until I can be sure of an answer that I'm okay with, the first step is increasing our tolerance for uncertainty. This is very important because with both of those types of firing in our brain, what we are in a large way looking for is certainty. So we want to raise our tolerance for uncertainty. We can start doing that by being aware of when we are anxious or obsessing, our tendency to seek out reassurance from other people. Because when we are in those states, actually no amount of reassurance is really going to help. And a lot of times we'll jump from person to person trying to get that reassurance until maybe somebody says it like the exact perfect way that we want it to be, that's gonna make our anxiety and distress go away. No, once again, that's feeding into it. That's, sending back the message to our brain that we actually need to be reassured because this is real. This is not real, right? Yes, there may be a situation that needs to be handled, but to obsessively and fearfully be consumed by it, that's not real. That's our brain misfiring. So we need to cut out reassurance at that point, right? That sends a message back to our brain that this is more real than it needs to be. What we want to do is, this is a pretty quick script that that we teach our clients when treating obsessive compulsive disorder and anxiety disorders. It is in those moments that you feel like you need certainty, facing into it by saying like, that may or may not happen, that may or may not be the case, and either way, I can handle it, okay? So that is the quickest way to do it. That is the quickest way to face into the type of bully persona that anxiety and obsessive thinking represents. We're like, okay, cool. Like that may or may not happen. Either way, I can handle it. Sometimes when it's something that is very, very, very triggering, that is just higher up on our hierarchy of things that we fear, that may not work because the brain will hear, what do you mean that may happen? And then it can trigger it even further. In that case, what I want you guys to do is play with it, play into it. So if the quick script of it may or may not happen, but either way I can handle it, was not enough at that moment, if the thought is like, what do you mean it may happen? Or like, no, like, and it keeps coming back, like, and it's very, very potent, then there's a couple things that we can do. One of them is allow ourselves to go to the worst case scenario. Now, people, when they first hear this, it's like, wait, what? Like, that's good, I should do that? Yeah, you should do that. Because since anxious thoughts and obsessive thoughts function so much like a bully, the more specific that we get about where that thought is taking us, the more that we can see like, okay, I can handle this. By that I mean this exercise called downward arrow. It's great to do this with a therapist, as I always will encourage in all of my videos. If you seek out professional mental health therapy for this, it's just gonna make this whole process exponentially faster, easier, and more effective. But what this is called is downward arrow. And what we can do is we can take the thought that's currently tormenting us, the thing that we are currently afraid of, and we want to face into it. So like, you know, the thought comes up and we go, okay, so then what? Then what happens? And then what happens? Okay? And then what happens? And then what happens? We allow ourselves to follow the trail of that thought and get curious with it and like invite, okay, like tell me your story. Invite it to tell us everything that it's worried about, okay? And then what happens? And then what happens? And then what happens? And then what happens? Oftentimes what we find is that we realize like, okay, well, so I may get fired from a job, okay, and then what happens? So then I'm stressed out for a few weeks. And then what happens? So then I start looking for another job. And then what happens? Eventually I start interviewing. And then what happens? Then I get offered a position. And then what happens? Then everything is okay. When we allow ourselves to face into the downward arrow of like where this fear can take us, we'll see that we are capable of coming up with a natural solution. And that is why that is so much more effective than immediately trying to suppress it. We need to allow ourselves to look at it. If we do that process and we're still like, no, we can't come up with anything and we're so stuck, we can't see beyond our current situation, I want you to ask yourself, are there any other possibilities? Are there any other possibilities? Because of our negativity bias, it is pretty common, especially when dealing with anxiety and obsessive thinking, to focus on like the worst case scenario, right? Because although it can be distressing, because of our negativity bias, we feel like that's actually more certain that that would happen. So although it's distressing, if we go into like the negative place of it, that's giving us more certainty. So in a backwards way, our brain is like trying to comfort us, because although it's negative, we are still certain. We can be certain of something. And sometimes our brain will prefer certainty of something negative than the unknown. So if we do the downward arrow and we still end up in a negative space, that's when I want you to challenge it. And I want you to ask, are there any other possibilities? And allow yourself to explore that. Because even though the negative version of the story might feel more certain, it's not. You can be just as sure of the negative version of the story as you can be of the positive version. So encourage yourself to explore the other side of that story as well, instead of just giving up at the end of the trail of the negative version of it. And you might naturally come to a solution, that's great. But if you don't, ask yourself, are there any other possibilities? So that's one way. Downward arrow is one way to do it. So the other way, if you're having an obsessive thought especially, this is really helpful. It's like, oh, this thought keeps coming back. We want to get rid of it. Trying to suppress it, like I've said a bunch of times in this video, it's not going to work. So then we give it air. We give it air and we do something called scripting. Scripting is really powerful when we, if we record ourselves. This is, we use this a lot in anxiety and OCD treatment. So you literally record yourself saying the thought that is distressing or the word associated with the image that keeps popping back into your mind. And you go into like the extreme version of it, right? So it's like, if the obsessive thought is like, you know, like that person doesn't like me, or, you know, they definitely like, you know, they rejected me, whatever. And it keeps going back obsessively and obsessively, or I suck, like I'm not good at this. And it just keeps coming back over and over again. Then record yourself saying that and taking it even further, right? Like to the point that it's comical. So like, yeah, I'm the worst, I suck, like nobody has ever been least liked than me, like I could probably win like the world record for the least liked person, almost like mocking the thought, giving it back like a taste of its own medicine rather than being scared of it. We go there, we allow it, and we just go on and on and on. I tell my clients to do it for like 3 minutes straight, even 5 minutes, and just say it over and over and over and over and over again, rather than trying to get rid of it. We say it over and over again, and then we play it back and we listen to it and we listen to it and we listen to it. What happens is that this starts desensitizing us to the thought. So we start getting used to it, so that then when it comes in, we end up being bored by it. And it's no longer distressing. Like, it's like, oh, okay, like I know this story. I've heard this a bunch of times. Like doesn't even cause the same spike in anxiety anymore because I've heard it so many times. Like, I recorded it, I repeated it, I listened to the recording over and over again. If you can listen to it for like an hour a day, if you're really struggling with obsessive thinking, allow yourself to do that. You're gonna get so bored of that thought that it is just not even gonna be shocking or surprising when it pops into your mind. It's gonna be boring. Once that happens, the shift from the thought being a problem to the thought being just like another thought starts to take place. And when that starts to take place, we naturally start getting less obsessed with it. Okay? So again, just to recap, things that we can do for dealing with obsessive and anxious thoughts. 1 is understand what's going on biologically. 2 is bring in self-compassion, because the moment that we start hating ourselves or feeling shame because of these thoughts, we give the thoughts a lot more power than they already have, and we're much less able to navigate them effectively, and we also give them the credibility of being real, okay? 3, don't seek reassurance once you have recognized that you are in an obsessive anxious pattern. Face into it. We can face into it by using the script of that may or may not happen, and either way I can deal with it. We can face into it by going to the worst case scenario, the downward arrow exercise that I explained to you guys. Or we can face into it by scripting when it's really obsessive, and that is recording it and listening to it over and over and over again. So like almost like beating our mind to the punch of obsessing on that particular thing, to the point that it gets boring and it gets dull and we're just like, oh my God, like I can't hear this for another moment. Like this is so boring. But it's no longer like, oh, I'm so scared of this thought, you know? So that's how we start to deal with it. That's how we start to master our biology, and we're able to continue moving in the direction of the things that we value, even though our brain might be misfiring at times in its attempts to keep us safe, okay? I hope that was helpful. If you guys have any questions about that whatsoever, feel free to leave me a comment, reach out to me, whatever the case, like, subscribe, share so more people can have access to this information. I love you guys. You're so powerful. We can do this, and have an awesome rest of your day, awesome week, sending you the most positive vibes that I possibly can.